Hello everybody, it's your favorite Source Engine nerd. There are two things that keep me coming back to Left 4 Dead. One of them is its vibrant community, and the other happens to be playing survival mode.
Oh, boo.
I know. Most people wouldn't touch this game mode if it wasn't for the Steam achievements, yet survival is synonymous with Left 4 Dead for me. Something about answering the question of what would happen if rescue never arrived or equipment malfunctioned tells its own unique story.
We are prepping an extraction team. Prepare yourselves and radio back when you're ready.
There's just one problem. There are only so many vanilla maps to play, and the custom map making scene, while not completely abandoned, reflects the game's retro age. Left 4 Dead is a game series that keeps on giving though, and after a decade since its release, PC players of Left 4 Dead 2 woke up to an update that added a plethora of content and fixes, bringing in survival mode support for missing chapters in the Left 4 Dead 1 campaigns. However, if you dig a little deeper, those survival chapters are just copies of their Left 4 Dead 1 counterparts with minor balancing changes, and many original maps still lack their own identity. Why did Valve deem certain maps as too complicated or unworthy of inclusion in the survival pack, and why hasn't anyone in the community bothered to make them into standalone survival maps after all this time? Let's take a deep dive regarding potential catalysts for 6 cut survival chapters, and the creative ways players managed to play Left 4 Dead's unofficial survival maps. A handful of the chapters featured throughout the Left 4 Dead 1 campaigns don't show up as selectable in survival mode, but that doesn't mean they're necessarily unplayable, just that the developers never intended for them to be accessible. The Sacrifice campaign accentuates this fact, with the docks, barge, and port chapters being readily available in co-op or versus mode, but not for survival mode, where the docks are rebranded train car, and the barge chapter is outright missing as a menu option. Changing a map's name to be more descriptive of the intended holdout area is unconventional, but not exactly groundbreaking. However, failing to include an entire map raises a lot of questions. Without diving into the entire development history of this campaign, Valve outsourced the creation of the Sacrifice downloadable content to Turtle Rock Studios. Comparing earlier designs to the result we ultimately got shows the campaign underwent drastic changes where core assets central to the environment, such as the freighter, were hastily recycled in an attempt to cobble together some sort of coherent theme. It's pretty safe to say that this chapter's exclusion was due to forever evolving visions and tight deadlines, rather than a deliberate choice. That's what the community thought as well, because on September 24, 2020, the Last Stand update brought this map to life in Left 4 Dead 2. Being able to officially play this map feels like experiencing a feature that went missing for a decade. A bit underwhelming, but overall a net positive to the game. Areas that were otherwise pointless dead ends to search and playing through the campaign are now arguably viable holdout spots. Besides adding some props and invisible walls to define the playable space, the community developers didn't really have to do much to accomplish this either. All of the weapons, ammo, health, and supplies are already scattered across the environment. The map itself has undergone extensive playtesting from versus mode, and there's already a way to activate the horde by climbing the hill. Okay, technically the Last Stand update members opted to place a generic radio instead of startling the crows to activate the timer. I much prefer the original event trigger, and I guess you could say that's a hill I'm willing to die on. The point is, the barge has all the elements of a survival map, maybe even a good survival map, so the only thing stopping anybody from playing it prior to the Last Stand update was the lack of a button to select that chapter in survival mode. For the original Left 4 Dead, as well as the console versions of either game, there is no community update, and the barge remains a figment of the main menu's imagination. That didn't stop knowledgeable players from managing to access the hidden Sacrifice chapter long before it became official though. By selecting the train car chapter and going out of bounds, it is possible to reach the safe room and transition to the barge in survival mode. Players projectile boost up to an invisible barrier and then fall down onto the fence to survive the fall damage. From here, another survivor is boosted or teleported to revive them on top of the train, and then freely roam to the safe room. After a bit of traveling, the barge can be seen in all of its glory. This remains the only way to play the barge on Left 4 Dead 1 besides utilizing the developer console on PC. It's a shame because maps shouldn't be gatekept like this, but it got me thinking, what other hidden maps are a few small changes away from being completely functional in survival mode? Q. The barn. Just like the barge, it's possible to access the missing survival chapter Blood Harvest by doing some advanced movement tech to reach the safe room from the previous chapter, the bridge. Now is a good time to mention that there's 2 chapters both named Bridge, and the Crash Course Bridge isn't what we want because all of its maps are already configured for each game mode. So without further ado, let's load up the bridge where we can pull an epic gamer move.
What a f***ing Jeez, oh my god, what the fuck? Sorry.
Anyways, players move forward while repeatedly teabagging this mountain, and at certain spots and angles, the wall lets them through. Beneath the terrain, another projectile boost is done to scale the raised floor height of the cliffs. Walking into the mountain and then going idle warps the survivor above the ground where they can enter and close the safe room door. For a map that's nowhere to be seen in the Last Stand update, and barely talked about online, the barn seems overshadowed by its similarity to the more recognizable and fleshed out farmhouse chapter, which also features a barn.
What playtesters liked most about the finale was that it was the one time they were able to stop, catch a breath, make plans, and set up traps for the infected. So these crescendo events came out of wanting to get more of that planning and strategy into the rest of the campaign.
Survival mode repurposes these unskippable crescendo events as the basis for holding out each campaign chapter, but the barn just has an avoidable alarmed car, leading to this chapter feeling more like an afterthought. Whether it's the lack of creativity or time that led to scrapping an official survival component to this chapter, it can be played despite the lack of a crescendo event. Sort of. There's 0 infected in survival mode without proper spawn navigation, so it's not exactly riveting gameplay. Unless you're a fan of idle games, or hearing the same horde sound effect on repeat. By selecting all the navigation tiles and adding the missing attributes to spawn infected, the map isn't that bad. Sure, you'd have to add some invisible walls and balancing changes for it to be viable, but the uninhabited houses and central warehouse provide enough of a unique atmosphere that distinguishes it from the finale in my opinion. An online search for the barn will show that nobody's attempted to make a survival port of this map, which is weird for how little work needs to be done. Stranding the survivors in a lore-accurate survival scenario isn't that difficult when these rocks can be removed to create a one-way drop, and the military could theoretically block off or destroy the bridge when they canonically cross it. The more I look at the barn level, the more missed opportunities I see for another awesome survival map, but I need to move on before this video goes off the rails. Hilltop is the first chapter of Blood Harvest and definitely wasn't designed for survival mode. Not only is the only way to access the survival intro chapter of a campaign through the developer console, but there's no way to activate the horde anywhere within this map without also using commands. Normally I'd ask why Valve or the community omitted making this map available in survival mode, but I think it's pretty obvious. Hilltop is basically a glorified walking simulator, with this building being the closest thing to a holdout spot, and that's saying something, considering the rooftop is inaccessible. Any rescue closet doors are permanently locked and indestructible in survival, making exploration limited to the regular playthrough path. I don't really know how you'd make a realistic crescendo event that radically fits this map.
What the hell is this?
But then again, nobody knows how powering lift startles every infected in No Mercy.
This is nonsense.
A map that does have a legitimate way to activate the timer is the greenhouse from Dead Air. Survivors fall down to the Holly Street apartments and are met with an alarm car in the streets below. Triggering it is optional, similar to the barn, yet I can't help but feel this is another missed survival chapter opportunity. If the entrance to the hotel was blocked or the car was unskippable, the survivors are trapped fending off endless hordes of infected until eternity. This chapter is hiding a lot of weird design choices behind its dull appearance. Someone spent time making the reception room of the apartments, for instance, only for the vast majority of players to mistake it for any other dead-end door blending into the environment, or completely ignore it due to its limited gameplay purpose. Without a rescue closet or more than a couple items at best, there's no practical reason to visit this location, except for it being one of the few defensive survival spots. Neglected sections of the greenhouse chapter turn into the lifeblood of this mode when the alternative is tight corridors and a wide open street susceptible to attacks from all directions. One of the criticisms from the Boundary Break response video was that chapter transition inconsistencies were missed. While nearly every safe room has some form of missing texture, object, or nitpick that could constitute its own 20-minute video, having inspected this map, I can confidently say the greenhouse is the level design equivalent of being held together by duct tape. As this commenter points out, the survivors retile the kitchen between chapters, but it goes much further than that. A ladder, various stains, wood planks, an entire metal fence, and boxes all magically show up in the next level despite being within clear view of the streets. Buildings and vehicles are placed in the background haphazardly regardless of any continuity conflicts. The whole map falls apart under closer inspection, but there's just enough effort put in to make it passable from a distance. My personal favorite is this cluster of windows. Whoever copied the window group forgot to align them all to the building, resulting in the models noticeably clipping into the wall. Each set of windows are different distances apart too, so it heavily implies the creator ballparked the center of the building, said, "Yeah, that's close enough," and called it a day, hoping nobody would notice. Let's move on to the next map and avoid getting tunnel visioned. Death Toll's Caves chapter is the only other survival map that's impossible to legitimately play. A server can switch maps and game modes at will, so the chance any campaign's intro chapter could be played in survival mode as long as there's a way to start the event. Unfortunately, the caves don't contain so much as an alarmed car throughout the entire road, another missed opportunity if you ask me. Players must have struggled enough with the chapter's length itself because the developers felt an extra ammo pile before the safe room was necessary. Most rooms are made to give the impression the level isn't incredibly linear and don't offer much in terms of survivability, except for this building. You can tell not much thought was put into this room because the rocks in Versus mode clip into the stairs, but it's yet another example of an underutilized section of the map practically revived in survival mode.
We learned through playtest that survivors have a natural tendency to climb up on things. It's like the infected or a flood, and survivors are always trying to get to high ground.
With ammo below, holding out up here has that perfect blend of a familiar defensive spot crossed with a decent challenge from the multiple entrances. No Mercy's apartments are the last chapter missing a survival counterpart. Versus mode technically uses separate map files for each campaign chapter, but aside from adding more ladders for Special Infected to climb or making slight gameplay changes to fix exploits, both are functionally identical for our purposes and are talked about interchangeably. Besides this map, additional open windows and scalable rooftops for Special Infected to spawn and wander around are also arguably needed in survival to prevent certain locations from being too overpowered. After alerting the Horde, there's a plethora of defensive options filled with long sight lines to choose from, to the point that AI survivors are reaching medals on their own.
Hey man, that hurt!
No offense. Actually, I take that back, because in order to play the apartments in survival, you kinda have to willingly set off the car alarm instead of going around it. Thanks, Francis. But what if it wasn't like that? In the next Left 4 Dead video, we'll take an in-depth look at reimagining No Mercy's apartments, Death Toll's Turnpike, Daredare's Greenhouse, both of Blood Harvest's chapters, and the Sacrifice's Barge as custom survival maps that anyone can access and play via an add-on publicly available on PC. We'll be respecting Valve's familiar survival standards and balancing choices,
You're kidding, right?
while simultaneously adding quality of life features and fixes, documenting it all along the way. In other words, there won't be an episode 3. You have until December 24th to leave a comment and submit anything you'd like us to add or change about the maps. As long as it doesn't violate YouTube's terms of service or copyright.
That was close.
Things such as HUD, character, or item replacement mods that are persistent across chapters and affect the game are also off limits for obvious reasons. We're only altering the maps. I like the idea of commemorating people's comments, positive or negative, in some permanent fashion. As an example, commenting to make one of No Mercy's billboards more realistic is valid.
Oh my god, I hate Canada so much.
while wanting a realistic character remade will be rejected for not being a map edit. Maybe nobody will comment and the maps will remain virtually intact. Maybe the final result will be as unplayable and filled with inside jokes as Globtastic, or maybe the wall graffiti of every safe room will replace what people arguing in the comments section. Who knows? See you all next time when we reimagine survival modes for God and Left 4 Dead 1 maps. Merry Christmas!